Okay, so audience participation first. Here's what I'd like you to do, and it's something that you're going to do in your head. I won't make you raise your hand or anything, but I want you to do this in your head. I'm going to ask you to think back as far as you can think back in your life. For some of you like me, that goes uncomfortably far back, 60s or 70s, but think when you can sort of be conscious of, for example, an industry. I'm going to name 3 industries, and in your mind, I want you to think, how much has that industry changed from as far back as I can think till now? So for me, I grew up I was born in 1961, so I can kind of remember late 60s. So pick your frame of reference then and now. I'm going to name 3 industries, and now think. So number 1 is the music industry. So how much has that changed? Like for me, the late 60s was the Beatles and records and bands. Has that changed much to now? Yeah, it's changed, but it's still music. You know, we're here in Nashville. It's still just as cool a place to be. So that's one industry. How about restaurants and eating out? Was that much different in the late 60s to now? Is it better now, worse now, same? Seems comparable, right? How about the airline industry? Much change, better or worse? Seems worse to me, right? So I think it's useful to think about the pace of change in an industry and then compare it to what we all do. And think about technology and computing, software and tech from, say, 1968 till now. 1968 was the year that the term software engineering was first used, ever. There was a conference, a NATO conference. They coined the term. What did we have 40 years later? The iPhone. Now graph that. So it's a pretty spectacular change in those 4 decades. Continue that out, and that's what we're likely to see for the next 40 years. We're living in a world right now where the pace of change is so spectacular that it can make you a little dizzy. It's one of the reasons why people in this room hesitate to take a job at work that takes you out of technology even for 1 year. Like if you were asked to do a sabbatical for 1 year in a group that had nothing to do with tech, hey, we need help in our marketing team, we just need to manage the team, there's no technology involved, we need you there for 12 months and then we'll find something else for you to do. What's the first thing that goes through your mind? If I do a non-tech thing for 12 months, there's no way I could ever come back and catch up, right? That's what you would all think. If you did that in the restaurant industry, you come back, you'd be all right, right? So this is a weird technology sort of pace that we have to live with. And the backdrop for our panel today is the following. And this is also something I'd like you to think about, because I want you to think of what you think as we've got 4 experts up here going to tell you what they think. But the concept here is the following. As technology continues to change and evolve, and there's cloud and mobility and devices and AI and all these amazing capabilities that we thought we just couldn't do in the past, as that progresses, the one constant that we've got is your data, right? You still have customer lists, you still have intellectual property, you still have software, you still have financials, you still have PII. That was true in 1968, it's true now. In fact, you probably have more of it, but you still have data, and we all know that 40 years from now, not only will you have data, you probably will have more of it. So the question we've been preparing, I've asked the panelists to comment on, and that I want you all to comment on as well, is what do you do? Like, how do you protect your data as we're here on this stage? Imagine the stage shifting around from under us, just completely rumbling and wobbling. That's what it's like to run an enterprise. You know it is. Cloud, mobility, and virtualization, and all the different things that you feel you need to be doing. They're so different. How do you protect your data? That's going to be the topic today. We've all got some wonderful ideas. I asked them to make sure that they pick some interesting stories to share. And the way we're going to work this is if you feel the burning need to say something, get my attention somehow. We'll just go ahead and work you into the conversation. But we will definitely have 15 minutes at the end if you have some question that you think would be better asked then. That's fine too. But we're not here to perform. We're here to get you thinking. We want you to walk out of here. We all agreed. It'd be nice if you walk out of here with 1 or 2 or 3 ideas on some things you might do to be a little bit more effective in the way you do data security in your organization or in whatever you do. And some of you build products. There might be some suggestions for that. Does that make sense? And again, you know, don't be shy. I know a lot of people in here are definitely not. Now, what we're going to do, I'm going to ask them to start with down at the end with Kirsten. I'm going to ask them to say a little bit about name, rank, serial number, where they're from, what they believe in, and then we're going to get into this topic of protecting data amidst a rapidly evolving infrastructure. So, Kirsten, why don't you get us started?
Thanks, Ed. Check 1, 2. There we go. It is Nashville. We're supposed to do a mic check first, right? Kirsten Davies. I'm Senior Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer for the Estee Lauder companies. We have over 30 different brands, lest you think we're just one. We own Lab Series for Men, if you're familiar with that, and Aramis as well. MAC, Estee Lauder, Clinique, Becca, Bobby Brown, an enormous amount of brands. We are both B2C and B2B, and in manufacturing and R&D, it's a very exciting space to be in. I've been there for about 4 minutes now, actually 4 months. Prior to that, I was Chief Security Officer for the Africa Group for Barclays. During the split from the global Barclays brand. I've lived and worked on 4 continents now, so pretty exciting to be back in the USA. What do I believe in? I believe I can fly. I believe I can touch the sky. No. Look, yeah, thanks. There's a few people awake back there, just warming you guys up, warming you up. Yeah, look, super excited to bring the business side of the house to cybersecurity. I believe that there's a tremendous shift happening with chief information security officers. We need to get out of the dark closet spaces of the world and get into the boardrooms, which is where I am regularly talking about things that matter to the business, data being one of them.
Kirsten, do people realize how much cosmetics have gone B2C? I know you were sharing with me. I didn't realize how much consumer direct interaction exists in that industry. That's changed quite a bit, hasn't it?
Absolutely, it has, and it depends on from company to company. Some of our folks in the industry are broader scale. They sell in Targets and Walmarts and things like that. We do not. We're a prestige beauty house, and we are very high touch. It's one of our core principles. So we have standalone retail stores. Joe Malone is one of them. MAC is another one. We're also in travel retail, which used to be called the duty-free shops. It's travel retail now. Now you know. And we're also a huge online platform. So there's an enormous growth, even in prestige beauty for online. So in a high-touch performance, it's an interesting dynamic as we work with the business to bring that high touch that Estee herself introduced into the world of beauty in an online way. And how do you do that from a digital perspective? How do you transform the ways in which our consumers interact with us through 3D imaging and virtual try-on of makeup and virtual scent realization? We're doing things like that as well.
Great. Jay?
Hi, everyone. That's a bit loud. I'm Jay Panchal. I'm the Advisor and Chief Information Security Officer for the International Monetary Fund. It's a mouthful. My role is to look after the fund's information security aspects, covering governance, strategy, the requirements, how we're doing, oversight, etc. And who do I do this for, and how do I contribute to the goal of the company? Well, the organization itself is a collection or a membership of 189 countries, all focused on global financial stability, reduction of poverty, as well as now we're also moving into global collaboration on cyber risk, gender inequality, and inequalities in general, as well as climate change as well. Or more importantly, the sectors of our world that is not included in some of these advancements that we all take for granted. So how do we help bolster that as well? What do I? I'd say it's nice actually being able to do more work with our membership, where we can guide them on delivering principle-based regulation, helping the supervisors understand how to assess that, and helping them. And a good day for me is when you get a deputy governor for a central bank phoning up saying, hey, we followed your advice. We set up a global cert, or cert for our country, across all our financial sector. We're helping one another out. This then helps the country out. That's a good day for me.
Who are the adversary groups? I mean, you don't have competitors. That's kind of silly. Are they activist groups? Are they just hackers? Is it nation state? Who would have a serious beef with the IMF?
So we're also part of the United Nations, and I'm the IMF representative at the United Nations at Information Security. And we discuss this topic quite a lot. We have hacktivists. We have proxy organizations. We also have cyber criminals. And then we have all of the above who, for various reasons, are interested in various types of information that we process.
Is your high profile? So vandals would be...
The threat profile is very diverse, very dynamic, and pretty all-encompassing.
That's very interesting. Good. Paul?
I'm Paul Anela. Good afternoon. I'm Paul Anela. I'm the CEO of TDI. Despite what Ed said, I am here to perform, so if anyone has any song requests, I'm ready. TDI is a 20-year-old cyber services company. We've done work across the globe in pretty much every sector for companies all three of them have been with before. There's probably not much we haven't done, but as one of the vendors on stage, I'll shut my trap about that because you don't want to hear it. What do I want? An international soccer career, but that's not going to happen because I'm past 45. What I would really like in our industry, though, is an appreciation for just what you brought up, Ed. If you look back at computer science, software engineering 40 years ago, there was no such thing as a rigor or a scientific methodology to it. And that has advanced significantly. I can tell you that because I have a computer science degree. It may be expired. I got it so long ago, but I have one. And when my developers now talk to me about what they're doing, I have no concept of it. I just understand that there is a methodology and a rigor behind it. And what I would love is for our industry to start getting away from the idea that the next tool is going to solve it all, or the next viewpoint on data versus network versus endpoint is going to figure it out, and start focusing on a pragmatic, methodology-based approach, a programmatic approach to cyber. And I want it by Christmas.
Well, before you do it at Christmas, you got to show everybody those socks. Those are some pretty cool socks you got on there. What's the story there?
I like color in
color
in
works
outfits.
out nicely.
My family's Italian. It's
There
style.
When you started TDI, was cyber a big component of the work, or has that grown over time?
No, when we started, our recognition was that the U.S. federal space was pushing the envelope in some aspects of cyber, and at the time it wasn't cyber. It was information assurance in the DoD, and information security in the civil side. Now it's all cyber. And we really had to educate our customer, because the only thing driving cyber from a federal contractor perspective, which is a massive, massive market, and all the commercial companies that don't think they do government business, but actually do government business because they're catering to them in one way or another, educating the commercial side that was doing work for the government, and even educating the government on what the particular regulations were, was really very difficult. So our start was generally as the cyber partner for other companies to help them navigate that space. And now, when it went from 2 bodies on this particular IT program, the program could have been 50 million. You know, we supported one of the largest DoD procurements on the planet, which is still ongoing, and it's in the news all the time. Started with 1 person. They now have 250 cyber personnel supporting this organization. So there's been a massive change. Where I see it going in an ugly direction is, despite the fact that by 2021, I think we're supposed to have 3.5 million people, that are a dearth of 3.5 million cyber professionals around the globe. Despite that, it's becoming a hyper-commoditized service, particularly in the U.S. government, where they're looking for bottom dollar services, but top dollar quality. Yeah. And that scares me.
Interesting. Jeff, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here, and I see lots of friends in the audience, and I want to thank Greg Taylor for including me in this. Thank you, sir. I'm the founder of CyberStratus, which is a cyber consulting, strategy, merger and acquisition firm. I also have a unique relationship with a global firm based in Tampa where we are talking with investors right now about a very unique cyber roll-up strategy to build something fairly substantial. Prior to that, I was with Raytheon, leading their cyber activities as Vice President of Cyber Programs. Fortunately, we had the top cover from our chairman and CEO who invested $4 billion in buying 20 companies to round out our portfolio, most with unique technology and products. So the merger and acquisition game and process is something near and dear to my heart as well. Earlier in my career, after chemical and nuclear engineering, I spent time as a nuclear submarine officer. So if you dim the lights, I glow a little bit from making too many reactor compartment entries. 78 megawatt reactor generated a lot of power in those days, 15,000 shaft horsepower, really fun. Fun to be on, fun to drive the ship as well.
So your mic isn't even plugged in now. You're
No,
just
it's not. It's not. You know, and I speak around the world on occasion, and I was asked to speak at the annual Gulf Coast Power Association conference. And the entire audience, probably twice as many here, are all power generator people, right? And during my opening remarks, I said, I've got a warm spot in my heart for you guys, because I used to run a 78 megawatt reactor. I used to be a power generation guy. But 20 years ago, I got involved in cyber. For Paul's point, and I've known Paul for years and Jay for years, we didn't call it cyber at that time. It was information assurance, computer network defense, defense in depth. But to see the change in the industry since you first got involved, and I've been asked not to tell Ed how long ago we first met, because it's been quite a while. But just to look at the evolution. And Paul, to your point about the shortage of cyber human capital, which is huge, I'm honored to serve on a number of university boards to help shape their output, shape their curriculum to benefit industry. But if you believe the Business Higher Education Forum, headquartered in Washington, Dr. Brian Fitzgerald, Harvard trained, is the CEO, he would tell you, these are his numbers, not mine. Each year of all the PhDs we graduate in electrical engineering and computer science, 30 remain in academia. So how can you increase the throughput when you don't necessarily have the horsepower to do it? Now, one thing that I desire, and again, it's getting back to your point, Paul, about the shortage we have in this country, how can we infuse technology so that we can do more with less? So each analyst in a SOC can monitor 5,000 devices, for example. The infusion of artificial intelligence and machine learning, the migration from intrusion detection to intrusion prevention, and technologies that just allow us to do a much, much better job of securing whatever our priorities are with fewer people.
So Jay, let's start with you. IMF's got a lot of data, pretty important stuff. If you fumble data, I have a feeling everybody in here coughs a couple of times, right? What are some strategies, what are some thoughts on this question of how you protect your data in the context of a clearly shifting architecture? I'm sure you guys have had the same kinds of architectural changes that we all feel. What are your thoughts?
So just to touch on the changes and the data side of it, our organization is changing from becoming more, we want to be more agile. Not only the business side, but also the technology side. So the use of cloud and some of these other technologies, plus agile methodologies, DevSecOps, all these things.
Public clouds you're using.
We have public and private.
Wow.
So all these things have to be secured.
Right.
In addition to that, there are benefits as well to some of these things that take us a long time to deliver the protection capabilities on premise. So there's a combination there. And the problem that you face always as a CISO, as every one of you all, is what do you prioritize on? For the finite funds that you have, how do you prioritize? And what we've been working on is working with the board, their immediate senior management, the CEO level, I guess, or the deputy managing director, and every department head and every layer below to define and identify what we call the crown jewels. We saw Heartbleed and the nice graphic, so we branded it. And now out of 4 risk committees that we have in the year, 3 of them are covered in crown jewels. They all want to know what are the crown jewels, how are we protecting them, how are we doing against protecting those things. So this helped us provide some focus. And it also invokes a reaction by everyone processing this information to do the right thing. When you have a classification system, it doesn't work sometimes because people don't understand how to interpret it.
Let me ask you about crown jewels. Would it be, you don't have to get into it because if you do, we'll probably all have to get shot or something. We know too much. But is it stuff like information about some financial infrastructure related or international related decision that's about to be made or announced has to be kept quiet and embargoed? Is it that kind of thing? Is it information mostly, or would it be lists of companies and and names and balances and things? What would it be like?
So the IMF is sorry, that's very loud. Sorry, the IMF is the lender of last resorts. We don't just help out. We don't help out institutions. We help out countries.
Yeah.
And in that, there are 3-pronged approaches of what we do: surveillance, identify what is the state of the economy, where do they need help, etc., and provide them an annual report as part of the membership. So large amounts of data are processed on that of all matters of sensitivity. So it's you have to protect it very, very well. Second set of information is where do their training needs? Where do they need to focus? We help them develop capacity of how to do tax, how to do this. But there's a lot more sensitive information there. So the kind of data that we have would be market moving,
Right.
and would have grave ramifications around the world. In addition to this, when a country is in stress, you don't want to be losing information at that point in time because it makes the situation a whole lot worse, and it's people's lives at risk as well.
Let me make sure I got what you said, because I think there's something useful here. You're saying that you dig in, look at the crown jewels, make sure everybody agrees, and then your data protection strategy really kind of focuses on that. And you're not letting the other stuff go, but it's not as important. Am I saying that right?
Kind of, but the biggest difference is the culture of the organization and how we operate. Where not only is it the data protection strategy, fueled by prioritization through what is the crown jewels, like we just discussed, but there's also the matter of how do you invoke a cultural change in the way people act to protect that information. No technology in the world is going to protect everything if human beings are just giving them away. And we're susceptible. So we had to change that aspect as well.
Yeah. Kirsten, any of that resonate with you've got data to protect as well? What are some strategies that are useful to you?
Yeah, that has a huge resonance with me. So let me describe our data. Our data is everything from our consumer transactions online and in-store to our consumer loyalty programs. So if anybody has an Estee Lauder card or a Clinique card or a MAC card or anything like that. We have healthcare information because we run clinical trials in our R&D. We also have intellectual property, IP, because of our formulas from skincare to color to everything. So when we talk about data in our environment, it's a very interesting combination of challenges. I could walk in the door and say that has to be secured and you can't use that data, and wait a second, why is that out there? But the reality is that our brands have grown by engaging with consumers on a regular basis based upon buying patterns, based upon desires and wishes for a certain skincare or texture or sunscreen cream or anything like that. And so if I become too stringent from my perspective on protecting the data and don't actually have appropriate governance, going back to your cultural discussion, appropriate governance around the data so that the business can actually use the data to monetize it, data being the new oil, right? Then I've missed an opportunity to enable the business on that side. So for me, it's a constant balancing act between saying, look, we absolutely have to have a crown jewels approach. When I was in Germany with Siemens, we called it the golden nuggets. And when you have that in the German language, it is a golden nuggets. It was just a constant joke. I loved working there, by the way. Please don't take me wrong. It just was fun working with Germans. speaking of German accents. But from a crown jewel perspective, I have to have a very clean fidelity around what is sensitive, what is critically sensitive, and what is absolute black and white. You will never not let that out the door without the appropriate protections around it, right? Because we're a creative company. We grew up creatively, and so I have to come up with creative ways to engage with the business on the data.
Yeah, you have an eclectic range of things from manufacturing to R&D to business. I was surprised you were telling me about the full range of things you protect, and it is surprisingly rich. That's really
security is security, I find. I mean, I'm fascinated with your story around the submarines and energy and government work and IMF work. At the end of the day, we all have to abide by certain principles. We also have basic hygiene that we all need to do, and some of us do that better than others. Some of us don't do it well at all, let's be honest. There's foundational principles that we need in every industry. I think the fine-tuning comes in around whether it's B2B, B2C, business to government, whether it's a product or a service or what those things are. I mean, in banking, it was fascinating. I didn't have to necessarily walk around protecting vaults of gold, but I did have to walk around protecting vaults of cash, like paper money. And in Africa, we would have folks literally break into a bank branch and stick a dynamite in the vault, trying to blow it open to get the cash out of it. So,
Paul, what do you think? What strategies do you recommend in this context?
Yeah, I think the nature of the conversation being data, and particularly the strategies around crown jewels are very effective. And though not spoken about, I'm sure there's some level of it at your organizations. But having service customers around the world, if we're being honest here, CISOs, maybe not this crowd, but CISOs have to grapple with the fact that there are a lot of organizations out there that aren't addressing the fact that they don't even know their own reality. And as much as you're focusing attention on the crown jewels and particular assets, et cetera, if you can't articulate how you're doing in terms of effectively protecting it, it doesn't really give you the insights you need to address that. I mean, if we were capable of truly understanding how well we protect our organizations, we wouldn't have a 38% uptick year over year of cyber incidents. $500 billion a year in costs on breaches. And cyber insurance isn't covering you. They're only paying about a third of the cost on average on your losses. And the reason I believe this is we can't answer some basic questions. First of all, what are you doing? What is your coverage of the cyber domain? How well are you doing? What's the effectiveness there? And overall, what is your reality? What is the risk? And there are a number of reasons. The people, the lack of having them. We have over 3,000 tools out there. So there isn't one tool that's going to provide the answer for you. And so for me, a strategic implementation of a look at, once you've implemented a strategy, how are you measuring it? Because reporting is a very big issue. If you look at cyber reporting, and now we really got to be honest with ourselves, there is no common lexicon in cyber reporting. 25% of Fortune 500 boards now are articulating cyber as a strategy, corporate strategy, profitability, growth, cyber. And if you go to any boardroom around the world, doesn't matter what language you actually speak, the moment you slide an income statement, a balance sheet, pro forma projections across the table, everybody understands. But let's face it, in cyber, we are taking spreadsheets, normalizing them and rolling things up. We're taking vulnerability assessment reports and slapping them in a PowerPoint and monthly reporting to the board, saying last month we had 10,000 vulnerabilities. This month we have 5. That tells you nothing contextually, and the board doesn't understand that, so they say great, until they're Equifax. Because it wasn't a strategy on how you protect data that got Equifax. It's that they weren't measuring how well they were patching their systems as one element of cyber. So my theory is it's a pragmatic approach towards cybersecurity performance improvement that's based on risk management, metrics tied to business objectives, and continuously monitoring and reporting on that. If anyone can figure that out by Christmas, I'd really appreciate it.
Jeff, same question.
Equifax, 143 million records were lost. Yahoo, 500 million. Those are big numbers, big numbers. I get asked questions like, so how do you really implement cyber resiliency for the infrastructure? That's kind of a new name that just evolved over the last year or two, but it all starts with what the priorities of the organization really are. You know, I had the opportunity to speak on a panel with Congressman Mike McCall from Texas a couple years ago, actually it's been. It was a 4-hour panel, by the way, and it was for the media, congressional staff, and Congress. And McCall gave the opening remarks, 5 minutes. His point was the United States has lost over $1 trillion in intellectual property due to cybercrime. His words, not mine. Why invent it when you can steal it? So, at Raytheon, all the companies we bought really play into what I would call a layered approach, multifaceted approach to cybersecurity. Recognize the perimeter is going to be hacked. What do you do inside the perimeter? Change the culture to implement secure software development practices to minimize the exposure, to minimize the attack signature, the attack risk. But if you use a commercial off-the-shelf scanning tool, you generally only identify 30% of the vulnerabilities. So it really has to be built into the culture from the first day that first line of code is written. You incorporate insider threat monitoring within the perimeter. We implement all these techniques that create a layered approach, but what it really comes down to now is the data. There's an IDC article that I think is very, very well written, and it parallels virtually everything Sertainty does. If you haven't read the article, I'd recommend it. The title is Data the Next Endpoint? Is data the next perimeter? Because hackers are going to find their way into your infrastructure. But if you can protect the data and govern the data and what it does, what it does not do. Perhaps you can access data if you're tied into your company network, but not a Wi-Fi network at Starbucks. Just won't allow you. But you can incorporate a lot of rules at the data level that could simplify all other aspects of your cybersecurity posture.
Is that the secret sauce? I mean, is that really, when you think about shift from enterprise to cloud, for example, is protection at the data level, is that the best way to do it?
That's
and
my
interested
opinion.
in other thoughts here. It seems like that's right. I'm feeling
Seems.
Greg over there probably agrees with that
Well,
approach. I think that's probably right.
I was going to add, I think the journey that we're taking as well, when we're talking about the prioritization, either in the cloud or anywhere, has to have some active dialogue with all the people who are involved, because they have a shared accountability as well as a shared responsibility. So if you're doing a crown jewels prioritization effort, effectively you come up with a series of assets with some impact statements that tell you how important this data is and the impact it will have to the mission of your organization. So we're always saying, how does this answer the so what? Well, ask them the questions, but ask them transparency. Let them have the discussion in front of everyone else, because they know it's going to affect their joint budget. Most organizations have flat budgets most of the time, unless they're bringing revenue in, so they have to make reallocations. So make reallocations where it matters the most. So let them find it out. What's the priority? At least discuss it. And in that, for example, we had a great example where we had a certain department that was collecting so much data, and we asked the question, why are you collecting the data? It costs us to store it. You want to shift it to the cloud and modernize, make it evergreen. It's important data. But then we challenged them on the business process. And Kirsten had a great example of, she knows her business very well. And she's learning more and more about business. You've been there 4 months. But you need to know about your business process. And in this example, we were able to challenge the business process. Do you actually need that business process anymore? We changed and we led them to reduce the amount of data that they had to collect, reduce the amount of data they had to kind of protect in the first place. So the more you know about your business and getting them to transparently discuss this, the better chance you have.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. Paul, what do you think?
Just to play slight contrarian, on the premise of is there a difference moving into the cloud? I think there is, and I almost pose it back to everyone here. We've seen a severe uptick from hacktivists to nation states saying, wait a minute, if everyone's going to make it easier for us by going to the same target, we're just going to target that target. And we've seen that through some of the hacks that have come through managed security companies, because they said, ooh, wow, if they have backdoors into all these organizations, let's just go to them. Why go to one organization in particular when you can hit 10,000? So I kind of put that out there as a bit of a challenge to the notion that nothing changes when it goes into the cloud. I think it does. I think it changes the attack target vector, not vectors, but the attractiveness of the targets now.
If I can build on that, Paul, I think very good comment. Every couple of years, the federal government publishes the top priorities for every CIO. What's the #1 priority? Migration to the cloud. And they have to defend why they can't do so relative to any of their capital investment decisions. What's #2? Data center consolidation. Now, what I might like to see is that when the next priorities are published, data empowerment or data protection is one of the objectives, but they need to understand how to do that. And to your point, data is the next oil. The big difference is oil is limited. We have a limited amount of it, and data will just continue to grow and be more valuable.
I agree with that point. That should be the top priority. Data protection, right?
But can I also highlight,
Sure.
you do sometimes get better opportunities to protect the data in some instances with cloud as well. I'm going to be slightly contrarian to your contrarian point. So depending on where you are, you may even find some advantages in going to the cloud. Private, public. The thing that we've learned going to the cloud or taking a different series of risks or trying to take advantage of some other types of risks, if you don't have the capability in-house, you may actually benefit from getting it somewhere else. And your time to get that level of quality of protection assurance may be dramatically reduced to get there. But obviously it comes down to the rigor that you follow through on it. Yeah. And I will say one thing that supports your point, and that is there are generic cloud contracts that you have to deal with. So you can't always be more specific. And we have this issue. And maybe we need to work on that and look for a more adaptive model with the cloud providers.
Which makes more sense, to think of cloud as an apartment building that you move into and you've got to protect all your stuff, so you overlay your own locks and guards and all kinds of stuff into the apartment building? Or do you move in and let them take care of the security? And I hope you get the metaphor there. I mean, which makes more sense? And is it contextual to the company that's doing it? Like probably a different story for JP Morgan Chase than like a little credit union. But what do you all think about that? Are you comfortable using cloud native controls from a third party? And before you answer, let me say one thing. And Kirsten, you can go first.
All right.
Remember that about 25 years ago, somebody came to you and said, hey, let's stick a little hole in your enterprise, and I want to pour all your data out, and you give it to somebody, and they'll take care of moving it around. It's called Verizon and AT&T. So you already did that once. So it's not like this is new to have your data leave the enterprise. You already did that. But now the question is, are you comfortable parking it somewhere where Google, Microsoft, and Amazon are going to tend to it? What do you think?
So I think, first of all, there is no perimeter anymore. I mean, I think you do a great analogy on this one, Ed, with the person sitting in the pool with one straw and breathing out of the straw, and then all of a sudden the layer of the water goes down and there's a whole bunch of people in the pool breathing. I mean, that's the reality. You say that much more eloquently than I do. I really like this notion of data as the new perimeter. For me, I would take that analogy one further, which is essentially if I'm in an apartment building, sure, I've got security in the apartment building itself. There's a doorman, somebody takes my bags for me, it's fantastic, maybe a parking garage. Get up into my apartment, I've got some locks on the door, I've got maybe an alarm system. I also have a safe, right? So I'm still gonna put my valuables inside of a safe, inside of the apartment with the locks and the alarm system, inside of the building with the doorman and the gates around it. So I actually really do like that analogy. I think it works quite well.
You just need a couple of Rottweilers in there too.
Well, that's what he's for, right? Although he's sleeping very well right now. clearly no threat.
Paul, what do you think?
I think the analogy works, I think, to several points. One, looking at agreements that you have with cloud providers, you're only able to negotiate that if you know what SLAs and KPIs should be in your organization. Not that I'm going back to my previous point, but again, we're all talking in circles unless you really know what you're doing and how well you're doing it. It's analogous to the other day when my wife and I got back from Italy for my mother's 80th birthday. My 80th is next year. And we were looking, she was unpacking her stuff, and I saw her jewelry out there, and we live in a house with ADT, that's our security guard. And I thought to myself, I'll have no idea if something was stolen. None whatsoever. And I doubt she will either. That's a reflection on my wife's buying habits. But truly, it's analogous to the point of if you're not aware, if you're not actually measuring, none of this, sorry, I don't mean to be the total contrarian in the bunch, but none of it is relevant if you have no concept of what you're doing and how well you're doing.
So we're going to continue, but raise your hand if you got some comments or questions. Happy to include all of you in. Kirsten, and then we'll go to some
I
questions.
wanted to make a quick point on the Wipro issue that happened, right? So if those of you you probably are very familiar with this, you know, infrastructure as a service company hosting a bunch of infrastructure itself. The reality is that more and more of us are working with third party, fourth party, I call it nth party vendors, right? And you are only as secure as what their security is. And I think that one of the pieces of the puzzle that we must solve is holding our vendors and contractors accountable for their security posture and assuring that security posture as well, because that's causing more and more of those issues already. Those pops are happening through those third and fourth parties.
So Greg, you sat in the front row, you had your arm up. I think front row people should go first.
Is it turned on? Okay. My name is Greg Taylor. I'm the CEO of Sertainty Corporation. I'm not going to do a commercial here, but
Sponsored our panel.
I would like to challenge the current paradigm and mindset that no matter how well you protect it or what you do, as long as humans continue to give it away, it's vulnerable. I'd like to challenge that. I was one of the 145 million at Equifax that got hacked. And I actually got violated personally. My EVP that's sitting in this room and I were in discussions with Equifax about a year before that hack took place. We wanted them to become a technology partner. They thought our technology was way too secure and didn't need it, and none of those people work at Equifax anymore. Can you imagine that? I will tell you this, I used to offer a very substantial financial reward for anybody who can take a piece of data, turn it into a UXP object, which is our technology. If you can break into it, God bless you. Our federal government can't do it. Their labs can't do it. Our three-letter agencies can't do it. So it doesn't matter who in your corporation gives it away to anybody in the world. It is worthless to them. Let me say it again. It is worthless.
So why do we have that mindset today? Is the pain factor not high enough for people to start paying attention at the data layer? I mean, is that the answer? Why do we have that mindset that you can't protect it? The technology is here, and I'm sure we're not the only ones.
Let me ask the panel, how important is it to select a technology-based control here that works? Is that pretty essential? What do you think, Jay?
I think it's essential to have the right solutions, but if your organization is anything like mine, there's a bit of a trade-off sometimes. Yes, you want to protect the data, but you're not there to just protect the data. You have to deliver on the mission of the organization. And when you're dealing with business processes, there are some trade-offs. So you're looking for the right balance. And in this instance, I guess the technology is important to have something that can provide that level of protection, but also bringing the awareness to the person operating that technology, deciding to classify it, to deciding applying that technology or that technological control. It has to be a combination of things. Because we know that if one layer fails, at least the second layer is going to take over. And if the technology is that good, excellent. But before we get to that point of testing it out, let's avoid the problem in the first place.
Let's go to another question. What have we got? In the back. Name, rank, and serial number first.
Well, funny enough, you knew I was a veteran. That's kind of scary. Daniel Sertainty, I'm the Deputy CISO for Science Health based out of Atlanta. We deal with 190 million medical records every year. So a couple things I wanted to kind of key on. As far as the data, agreed, data is key, but that's kind of been the mantra for probably the last 2 decades, right? At the end of the day, that's what everybody goes after is the data. And we're talking about kind of putting the security model around the data. But I'll give you an example. If I have a website that pulls medical records, and I secure the hell out of the data but don't do anything in the app, I'm still getting to the data, right? So there's an upstream and downstream model of protection, which most of us would call defense in depth. So let's not forget about that. As far as the cloud portion of it, it's not kind of like a one shoe fits all. I can tell you that my cloud is completely different than your cloud and the security that we put in there. So to kind of paint that broad stroke. So, and finally, there was one other thing I was going to, doesn't matter. Appreciate you guys being up here. Appreciate you guys talking to us, and I'm sure somebody else wants to talk.
Great, thanks. And I agree, different clouds have different attributes. A little rough when people just say generically cloud. That's like saying, you know, infrastructure. It's just too general. A good point. Next, yeah.
Thank you, panel, for being here today. Chris Kennedy, I'm the CISO of a small tech startup in the continuous security validation space called Attack IQ. I hope I talked to all of you today. The panel said some very interesting things today that clearly resonate with me as a 20-year practitioner, having sat in many of the seats and shoes that walked in the shoes that you guys have walked in. First and foremost, the complexity point you opened with, Ed, very interesting to me in terms of just thinking through 20 years, the complexity of systems and how dependent businesses are on technology today and how dizzying of array that is. Paul, your point's very resonant with me in terms of you got to know your business. And many of you said many organizations don't know their business well enough to even have a risk program, much less what they're spending money on security and how it's performing and what they're sliding across the board. I'm curious the board's perspective, the panel's perspective on what is the role of security testing and high complexity, dizzying array of security technologies availability, and where does continuous security validation fit?
Anyone like to take that one?
I'll take it. Needs to be baked into the process. So there's a reason why we call it SecDevOps and not just DevOps, right? I think that's the challenge, though. As practitioners, we need to be part and parcel of the very beginning ideation phase as well as baked into the process itself. Everything from code scanning and code certification tools, I think that's part of the testing, to gates as part of the process to check and double check. I envision a day when security is actually part of the design as well, meaning my engineers sit with the development engineers and actually design a better, stronger product for the future. I'm a firm believer in assurance post-production as well, because just because we got everything or think we got everything prior to go live, right, we need to go back and double check after regularly, cyclically, to make sure that the apps and all the work that we've done is doing not only what it should have been doing to enable the business, but it's also remaining secure through the whole piece.
I agree with that totally. Fabulous. We're also going on a similar journey as well, Chris. But the thing that we're thinking about in addition to those things is risk tiering. If you're trying to do a lot of this all of the time, every time, if you're just starting out, think of risk tiering to cut your teeth on it, and put in some kind of indicators where some application or some system that processes some level of sensitive information has some level of rigor and higher levels of assurance expected. That helps justify the extra work and burden and investment and pre-investment. And the other areas of pre-investment I would do is threat modeling. And don't throw away your threat models, reuse them, because you get a chance to re-educate. We throw away threat models. We get third parties come and do pen tests, they go away. Other area that we're also looking at is architecture assessments as well. Build them, keep them, And if we could find a way of automating all this stuff and keeping it as reference data that we can update over time, we'll actually learn from our own architecture better, how we protect the whole, how the application is structured, all those things. And I'm going to more technical depth and detail, but simple things like how do you make it easier for a developer to use some of the DevSecOps tools, find tools that work for them. And we actually had a dialogue with developers, and they chose some of the security tools, which is kind of cool. That means they're more likely to adopt it. And when we can automate the heck out of it, I hope that answers some of the question.
Well, we have time for one more question. We're actually less than a minute, but go ahead and ask, and we'll try and get you a quick answer. I don't know if there's a mic nearby.
Oh, yeah. Actually, don't let that timer fool you. We actually have 6 minutes.
Go.
6 minutes, so make the best of it.
My name is Mike Rogers. I work in cyber defense at Optum United Health Group. So we're pretty big and we have a lot of data. I guess a few comments just thinking on what all you guys have said about, is data the key? Yeah, but it's expensive to secure, so that's a problem. Kirsten, something you said, and I'm thinking about this from an app standpoint of, if everything has to come to your desk for approval on security, right, and the post-production, you're always going to be constrained. You're never going to have the capacity. You had any luck with distributing accountability to app teams, app owners, so they're responsible for the security and the decisions? And I agree with what you said, Jay, too, about getting them on board early so that they're buying into the process. But I'm just curious for your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a great call out if I didn't make that more clear. So again, 4 months in the new organization, so please don't think I'm a superhero. We're starting, right? Yeah, right, by Christmas, this is a good one, or Hanukkah, as the case may be. In previous lives, absolutely. I think that the closer that you can build that security tooling into where the work is being done, the better. The fewer things that have to come to my desk or to my team's desk, the better. Because there are so few of us, and we need to be learning how to do this with fewer and fewer people, but be more and more effective. So as a CISO, I think one of my primary responsibilities is not only to make risk transparent, so I'm a risk transparency maker, but also to be a multiplier across the organization and create security champions across the business, but also inside of IT as well. And so when you have developers that are choosing the tools that are secure, awesome. That's a great day right there. And then we can do spot checking and things like that.
Can I just add one more thing? Because you just reminded me of something. I'm actually kicking this off next week. I'm going to review the workforce plan, the job ladders, the responsibilities, and I've been given the opportunity to say what aspects of information security do you expect of each layer? So business analysts, developers, what have you. And this is the kind of dialogue we need to have in our organization, like you said. And if you get that opportunity, like you said, the force multiplier, but we're actually getting a seat at the table, discussing HR relative issues. And then you have an opportunity to discuss internships, getting free work, etc.
I think we've made a lot of organizational recommendations to large organizations, governmental and otherwise, with respect to this very point. And I hearken back to my previous point about an engineering process. The best organizations that I've seen have somebody sitting at the table when you're doing the functional requirements, when you're doing the builds, when you're doing configuration management, and when you're doing decommissioning. Meaning it's not an external party that starts to drop in. And I get budget constraints and the rest, that's why it's so damn hard. But that's where it works the best, where just like software development, you don't build the software and then send it out in the wild. You have an external team that tests it. Just like your point, you have an external team that's constantly doing this, but you have integral components in the development team. They're all along the way of the software engineering lifecycle. Because if you don't even start at the beginning of functional requirements, you're dead. Right there, you've missed the point. And so the best we've seen is where there is responsibility throughout the way, and it doesn't have to go to the CISO level. It just has to be expertise.
If I can build on Paul's comments and Kristen, your previous comments about what I, and Kelly would characterize this as well, would call supply chain security, supply chain risk management. That, too, is really important to building the culture of the organization. Processes have to flow down to your vendors, your subcontractors, and what if they use vendors and subcontractors. If you're going to the second or the third tier, it becomes really difficult to manage the minimization of exploitation vulnerabilities inherent in the software, hardware, and firmware that ultimately get integrated. That is a challenge, and it's a big challenge. So how do you test for supply chain risk as part of the process? And we have common criteria testing, which you're all probably familiar with, for any hardware, software. So Microsoft, for example, can be used in the federal marketplace. It has to go through common criteria testing to verify that it is as secure as possible. So all of this needs to become integrated into the culture, but I still ask the question, is data the new perimeter? That's the question.
Well, let's make that our closing point. So how about a yes, no? I have a feeling I know what your answer is going to be, but do you think data is the new perimeter?
I think all the other security infrastructure can be penetrated. You can't eradicate the attack surface. It will be there.
So, yes.
I say yes.
Good. What do you think?
Yay.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. So, I mean, if you're going to wrap up a little bow around the panel, maybe that's what we have concluded, that your new perimeter is wherever someone can access your data, that is your perimeter. And that's a more complex thing to deal with. So I want to, first of all, thank all of you. There's a nice, friendly-looking audience. Didn't throw anything, and everyone seems to be smiling, so that's good. And I want to thank the panelists. We did 2 prep sessions, and they were very lively, and appreciate you all coming out and being so open with your advice. So I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and thanks for being part of the session.